I worked for an organisation some years ago and they had a lot of operational technology and one of my concerns was that, on the night shift people would connect the IT, which is the kind of normal kind of office systems, to the operational technology, because it was just easier to kind of drive it from a machine in your office rather than sort of go and visit the kind of, the console that was dedicated to it in the actual kind of plant room. And that particular company was involved in, manufacturing fairly volatile chemicals. So if you imagine if a threat actor was able to kind of compromise that environment and then sort of muck about with quite specific measures of different chemicals, that they could cause quite a serious explosion, and then you're sort of looking at potential loss of life and other sort of catastrophic consequences. My name is Adam and I specialise in cybersecurity.
How many years have you been working in cybersecurity?
Probably about 20 years. I started out in IT generally about 30 years ago, which was the start of my career.
And how did you move from IT into cybersecurity?
So I used to do things like kind of support and development, and sort of got involved with networks, and then sort of laterally from networks into security through kind of firewall technology and that kind of thing. And then sort of more into kind of information security, policy, kind of process. But modern terminology nowadays, it's cybersecurity, information security, rather than IT security, which is kind of like a bit of sort of legacy terminology.
I imagine it's a sort of area of work where terminology is something you need to keep up with, because is it a constantly evolving field of computer science, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in respect of the threat landscape, as we deem it, in terms of kind of, where the sort of threats are coming from and potential compromises, that's an ever-shifting kind of landscape. And things sort of come in and out of fashion. Sometimes you might be looking at sort of things like distributed denial of services, then it might be sort of more shift to kind of ransomware or phishing. And, the idea in security is that we have to be kind of flexible and dynamic and pivot towards where the threat's coming from.
So you're here to talk to us today about what people can do in their own homes to protect themselves from potential issues. That'll give you a chance to think of it. So let's think of it first. Before we go into this question, if there are 4 to 5 things that you think every home should do, that you just do without thinking, what those would be?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably things that have been sort of drummed into us over the years in respect to kind of, protecting our identities and our personal information. And I think it's also not to be sort of remiss in terms of what level of controls we put around that. Even myself as a kind of, cyber and security professional, I've been compromised. Got an interesting story. It's not particularly cyber related, but it's general kind of security related. We decided to kind of beef security up at home because we'd had some issues. Part of that security involved closing the gates at night to make things easier for the postman. We moved our post box to the gate, so you didn't have to open the gate and sort of come to the front door. Within about a week of doing that, I had my identity stolen because an organisation had invited me to renew my insurance documents and had sent my date of birth in the documentation that they kind of sent through, and somebody managed to kind of steal the mail from the box, got my name, got my address, got my date of birth, and within about sort of 24 hours of obtaining that information, I had payday loans set up in my name, new bank accounts, all sorts of kind of credit cards, and it took an awful long time to kind of shut it down. So I mean, I think that's just a general warning really of what can happen to you if you're a little bit kind of relaxed in terms of how you sort of look after your sort of personal data.
So if you were moving to a new home and you were setting up a new computer or your mobile phone or any piece of technology that connects to the internet, what are the steps that you take as normal, natural steps for you to take to protect yourself from potential hackers and viruses?
In terms of setting up a new computer, you don't really need to do a right lot these days. I mean, it's all kind of baked into the operating system for you. I mean, most people are using Windows at home, right? So it's Windows 10, Windows 11. You get things like Microsoft Defender. It comes with a kind of firewall and sort of out-of-the-box antivirus. That's generally good enough. I think what you need to kind of take account of is your sort of browsing behaviour and your habits and what you do when you're online. And I think more importantly, that's when you can potentially become a victim or be compromised. Do's and don'ts is, don't sort of, share your personal data kind of freely. Do ensure that, connections that you make to kind of, banking websites and that kind of thing are, encrypted and secured, and usually get some kind of notification that that's the case. Normally in the address bar you see that it's kind of HTTPS, which means it's kind of a secure protocol. Mm-hmm. I think another vector these days is social media. Be careful what you share on social media. Not so much my generation and the very newer generations, but the kind of one in between. I've worked for several universities now, and quite often we get kind of students coming to us and say, "Oh, I think I might have made a faux pas in terms of something that I've done online." And that usually means that they've either shared pictures of themselves that they shouldn't have, they've put data into a kind of social media account that they potentially shouldn't have done. And then that information has been taken and kind of sort of either used to either blackmail them if it's kind of pictures, certainly sort of compromising type bit. Yeah. Or if it's kind of personal data, or someone's managed to kind of socially engineer banking or account information out to you, and then use that to sort of for their own financial gain. So I think when it comes to what you do, it's not so much about the IT equipment and setting up a kind of home firewall and that kind of thing, because that's already kind of done for you. It's what you do when you're online and what information you share. And if you're sharing information, make sure that you're sharing it with a known party. And just make the right checks and balances to ensure that you're communicating with a trusted party.
And I think going back to your analogy about moving your letterbox to the gate, yeah, it's a similar thing with sharing information on social media. There are gangs of people who look out on, especially on local Facebook groups, for people posting their holiday photos whilst they're on holiday. It's well known, isn't it, that you shouldn't really tell people where you are and what you're doing, especially if you're going to be out of your home for a long amount of time.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is an MO that's used by threat actors. They can certainly, just by browsing social media, and again, it's down to kind of what we share online, and sometimes we just don't kind of consider the consequences. So absolutely, what you just said, telling people you're on holiday when you're on holiday, pretty much a kind of invitation, if you like, for people to come and have a nose around your house, or see if they can maybe break in. Certainly if they can use information to kind of obtain where you live, and if you're sending pictures and you put this kind of address information, that kind of thing, then it's pretty easy to sort of put two and two together.
And at risk of thrashing the home analogy to death, I suppose you want to lock the door, I guess, to your account sometimes. And I know when I'm setting up an account, like a new internet account, for example, or with a new business online, they'll often give you pre-made passwords that are just gobbledygook, yeah, that a lot of people are put off by using because they're probably worried they'll forget that password or something like that. What do you recommend they do in those situations?
So that is a challenge again, and again it comes down to trends that are changing all the time. The certain applications and things now start to kind of use what we call passkeys, which let you sort of authenticate biometrically sort of through your phone, so you don't have to kind of, or some other kind of secondary factor, so you don't have to sort of remember passwords anymore. So National Cybersecurity Centre, NCSC, have post recommendations about kind of password hygiene and that kind of thing.
Password hygiene?
Yes, that's what they call it. Yeah.
I've never heard that before.
Never heard that term.
What does that mean?
How you kind of protect your passwords, how you kind of form them, how you sort of manage and access them. These days we are recommended to kind of create a complex password, which is something 10 sort of characters or more. It's a random bunch of letters and numbers and special characters, which could be things like @ or hashes or exclamation marks, to form what we call a complex password. But the problem with that is that nobody can remember them, and that's when you get challenges. And certainly in kind of in the sort of business world, that just drives kind of traffic to the help desk, because people keep phoning up, so I've forgotten my password. So to help with that, there's things like password managers, so Dashlane, LastPass, those kind of things that can help you to store the password, and so when you kind of hit a site that needs the password, it kind of actually sort of populates it for you. Another useful trick though is to come up with a kind of passphrase, a song or band or something like that you like. Take the first two letters of each word and form a random set of characters from that, and then change some of the characters to either kind of letters, to numbers or special characters.
It does sound like I'd immediately forget that kind of password.
Well, yeah, but what you don't want is, your pet dog's name or your date of birth.
Yeah.
It's stuff that's generally quite ezy to guess. And historically, that's kind of what we used to do, or we used to kind of write it down on a post-it note and stick it under the keyboard, which again is, not really sort of, good practice. So all that we kind of refer to in terms of how we kind of manage and deal with that as password hygiene. I think, we're starting to move away from that, as the technology kind of advances. We talk about passkeys, which is something I mentioned a little while ago. Applications kind of started to support that, whereby you have something that's stored on a second factor device, such as a mobile phone, and it kind of uses a biometric that's kind of integrated into the device to actually authenticate you to that particular application. Another thing that we're starting to see that's used a lot in conjunction with passwords is multi-factor authentication, or MFA, or 2FA as sometimes called. Authenticator applications on your mobile phone, Google do one, Microsoft do one, Cisco do one. And that will generate a random set of numbers that you need to key in that the system is expecting, and then you kind of match the numbers up. Or alternatively, it might ask you to provide 2 characters from a string of characters, and you kind of key those in.
Lots of people use 2-factor authentication,
Yep.
which is a good thing.
Yep.
Is there any risk, do you think, that the moment from when you're signing into a website to when you get that 6-digit number or whatever sent to your phone, is there any potential for nefarious virus and hacker people to try and intercept that moment? Because that always feels to me, when I'm using these websites, as the point at which you're at your weakest.
Yeah, so I mean, there are things like man-in-the-middle attacks, which can potentially compromise that sort of
So
stuff.
that's what they're called, man-in-the-middle
Man in the middle, yeah. But the thing with those, with your, so normally your transaction with whatever it is you're interacting with is going to be encrypted, which means it's very difficult, certainly with the kind of technology that we have today, to actually sort of break the encryption and sort of sniff the traffic that's kind of going, sort of across in that communication. I think when we start to get into kind of quantum computing and that sort of thing, then potentially that eventuality will exist. I think what's more of a concern at the moment is that with everything coming under MFA, which is great, there's this kind of concept of MFA fatigue, whereby people are getting kind of challenged all the time and stuff that they're generally sort of reticent to kind of keep picking up the phone and doing something, because it just puts what we call friction in the channel. Yeah. So then they'll stop enabling it, or they'll be sort of more relaxed with the management of the particular device where the kind of secondary sort of factor is coming from, and that's potentially when things can start to be vulnerable and the weaknesses creep into the system, and that's when stuff can be compromised. Again, multi-factor authentication can be compromised through social engineering. So if somebody is coercing you into something and asking you to kind of provide them with information that's really should be for you only, then that's another sort of way that that particular mechanism can be compromised. And it does happen. It happened to a friend of mine that he was phoned purportedly by his bank, and they had managed over sort of a period of time to kind of collect certain information about him. So it sounded very authentic and genuine. And he was sort of going through a sort of MFA type sort of dialogue with the application he was interacting with, while the threat actor was on the phone, and they were asking him to kind of provide information as he was seeing it, because this particular individual thought that threat actor was potentially helping them with a fraud. Actually, what he was doing was committing the fraud. Yeah. And then within about a couple of minutes, £15,000 had been sort of boosted from his account. Fortunately got it back. But again, there's just another sort of scenario about how these things can come about.
And it's an incredibly stressful thing to happen to you, isn't it? When it does happen, it's horrible, isn't it? All the phone calls and worry that you won't get the money back.
Well, yeah, and especially if it's on your phone, because your phone now is like a wallet, and if your wallet gets compromised, if you lose your wallet, that's the same as your phone getting compromised, because all your cards are on your phone. It does cause a lot of stress and anxiety, because then you have to kind of shut everything down, get new cards kind of sent out to you, then sort of go through the process of pretty much kind of factory resetting your phone just to make absolutely sure that there's nothing kind of that's sort of lurking on there. And that takes an awful long time to kind of to kind of set up. I mean, you probably know when you buy a mobile phone, obviously you can sort of restore from a backup, but if you've backed up, potentially compromised files, then you don't really know what you're restoring. So best bet is to just kind of start again and reinstall the applications, which is obviously quite a time-consuming process.
I've always had it in my head that like Macs and iPhones are a lot less likely to have viruses on them. Is it just the operating system?
So I think that's a bit of a myth these days.
Oh, right. I'll get rid of my iPhone.
I think it used to be the case that Windows potentially had more vulnerabilities, but potentially because it was more pervasive than some of the operating systems, and I think because Mac was more of a proprietary system, it was felt that it was more difficult to kind of hack or sort of issue or create viruses that were designed to kind of compromise those systems. Same with Linux and other sort of flavors of Unix. I don't believe that's the case anymore. I think they're just as vulnerable as kind of Windows. And there's other technologies. Well, I mean, there's a whole other set of technology called operational technology, which are things like industrial control systems and things like SCADA and things that kind of power plant and machinery, and they're operating things like kind of power stations and kind of water treatment works and that kind of stuff. It's quite possible to compromise those systems through kind of viruses and malware and that kind of thing.
Which have a huge impact on local infrastructure and the lives of lots more people than just a hacked bank account.
Well, yeah, I mean, that sort of stuff can be quite catastrophic. I mean, I worked for an organisation some years ago, and they had a lot of operational technology, and one of my concerns was that, on the night shift, people would connect the IT, which is the kind of normal kind of office systems, to the operational technology, because it was just easier to kind of drive it from a machine in your office rather than sort of go and visit the kind of, the console that was dedicated to it in the actual kind of plant room. And that particular company was sort of involved in, manufacturing fairly volatile chemicals. So if you imagine if a threat actor was able to kind of compromise that environment and then sort of muck about with specific measures of different chemicals, that they could cause quite a serious explosion, and then you're sort of looking at potential loss of life and other sort of catastrophic consequences. And I think when you get into we were talking about it earlier, sort of national infrastructure. And things like the protection of national infrastructure, things that like CPNI do, then that's why they do it, because these the opportunity to do that are quite real, and therefore the right sort of safeguards and procedures need to put in place to kind of protect that infrastructure.
But going back down to more domestic cyber issues and security. A lot of the people watching this video at the moment will probably have elderly parents who they worry about opening certain things in emails. And it does appear from what we've said so far is the main issue with cybersecurity is the human interaction, and it's not so much somehow a virus getting on through a website that you're looking at, but actually what you click on because you've been tricked to do that. So what would you say to those people? What advice would you give to those people's parents? And
we touched on phishing earlier. So I mean, phishing is a huge kind of threat vector, and with the advent of artificial intelligence, the quality of the phishing emails is becoming a lot better. It used to be fairly easy to tell a phishing email because the language was quite poor, the syntax was bad, the grammar was bad. There were telltale signs. Some of that has improved quite a bit. Certainly, as I say, with the advent of AI, but there's still telltale signs to kind of look at. I mean, if you get an email and you're at all concerned about it, I mean, certainly don't open any attachments in there and don't click any links. But do hover over the links and hover over the kind of email address, which you can do with your mouse, and it will kind of reveal, because you can have text and it will say something, but the actual hyperlink underneath it is something different. So if that doesn't match what it is you're going to click on, then I would treat it as potential kind of phishing or social engineering. I think anything that comes across with there's a sense of urgency about it. If you don't do something by this time and there are consequences, that's usually a good indication that's a phishing email. I mean, your bank will never write to you with an email like that saying that you must do something. So again, that's a warning sign. I think just on that as well is that whilst with email you can sort of hover over things with a mouse and uncover stuff. If you get links in an SMS message, on a text message on your phone, that's much harder to kind of validate whether it's kind of genuine or not. So I would persuade anybody that, you know, if you get a unsolicited text message with a link in it, you know, in a text message, do not click on it, or do not kind of tap on it with your finger. Just delete it. There are a lot of scams out there at the moment where you get messages purported to be from kind of like delivery organisations, DHL, Parcel Force, the post office, saying that you've got a package waiting for you somewhere. It was but unable to be delivered. You know, click on this link now to kind of. But again, some of the language in there is, you know, it kind of emotes this sense of urgency that you need to kind of do something right now, otherwise, you know, you won't ever get your package and you'll lose your money. Anything that comes across like that, I'd say just delete it. If you are expecting a package and if you know who it's coming from, you know, go to an alternative method to contact them, either a different phone, try and get through to the customer service. Go to their website, you know, through a different link, you know, on your computer if you have, or just kind of spin up a new session on your browser or on your mobile phone, get the details, contact them that way, and that's a far better way than just clicking on a kind of anonymous link that comes through.
I think one of the most frightening things I'd heard when you mentioned AI, when it came to creating text messages, I've heard that lately they're using AI technology now to use videos that they've seen of a certain person on social media to create that person's voice and then ring a close family member with that person sounding like they're in distress and that they need some money sent to them right now. I mean, I don't know what I'd do if it sounded like my wife was ringing me up saying, oh, I need, you know, £1,000 sent quickly. I'd probably be like, what? She never wants money sent to her. For old people, or maybe for elderly people, or people who are even just in a stressful situation doing something else, they could easily fall for that trick.
Yeah. I think, again, it's just trying to sort of validate the authenticity of it. So, you know, if it's coming through from a phone call, you know, hang up and then phone the person back, ideally from another phone or a different method. I mean, what you're talking about there is a kind of combination of AI and deep fake. I don't know if you've ever heard it come across that terminology, you know, where, like you say, you know, images of people can be sort of overlaid onto other images to kind of make it look like somebody's doing something that, you know, maybe they wouldn't normally do that, or to shame them, and then that person could be blackmailed. Couple that with kind of AI and the sort of scenarios that you talked about. You know, you can come up with some kind of quite compelling scenarios whereby, you know, potentially a family member, friend, or whatever, it kind of appears to be in distress. And obviously, you know, you want to be positioned to help them, so it might be you kind of sending them money or you know, providing some information. Again, I think it comes back to what I said about sort of phishing. Anything that looks like you know, it is a stressful situation, or it's a motive anyway, and there's that kind of sense of urgency about it. There's consequences. Another telltale sign is, you know, if your first kind of reaction is to just sort of question it, and the person starts to then become a bit irritated, there's a bit of anger, or, you know, the kind of urgency is heightened, then again, those are all sort of, you know, kind of telltale sign. What I'd counsel in those situations is, you know, if it's come by phone or whatever, is, you know, hang up, dial the person back if you know them through a known number, validate, you know, is this really them? Are they in trouble? And also, you know, potentially tell somebody else, so it's not just you and that person that's kind of in the sort of mix, that there's another party that's kind of involved as well, because that's also helpful just to kind of
take a step back and understand that something's not quite right.
Exactly, yeah.
Finally, before we finish on this particular subject, have you ever accepted £100,000 worth of gold from an African prince via an email?
No, but, you know, I've been tempted quite a few times. I mean, I think I first got one of those emails kind of back in sort of the early 2000s.
Who falls for those?
Yeah, I know. But, you know, they were back in the day. It was like, well, you know, maybe there's something in this. But yeah, no, I've never actually clicked the button. But I've gone back and read a couple. Some of them are more convincing than others, right? I
mean, I suppose obviously it's a light, silly question, but it actually does demonstrate that this is an evolving landscape, and scammers are always going to find ways of using new technology like AI to find your information and use it basically for financial gain.
Yeah.
So what's the one big tip to finish this video, to finish this interview, you would give our viewers to try and negate that?
I think just don't be trusting. Ask questions, validate, verify, and especially, your personal data is personal to you. Protect it. Don't give it away freely.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adam.
Welcome.
I'm here today because I'm a survivor of the Holocaust. I am a survivor, but only just, because I was born in a concentration camp right at the end of the Second World War. But that comes right at the end of my story.